paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
I got a spaceship! They're coming! They're gonna enter our atmosphere!
When them extraterritorial,
extraterrestrial being.
Yeah, when they come, they'll probably come in secret, won't they?
Undoubtedly.
They'll land, right, and only a few of us will know all about it, I expect.
Oh, yeah, well, obviously. Yeah. Well, see, they'll have a very advanced spacecraft. Obviously, it'll have all the bits on it, all the anti-gravitational pull bits, so it can come down very softly, you know, like sort of...
And then all the door will open.
That's right.
Oh, my God.
And obviously, the whole world will benefit from their advanced technology. Because, I mean, they'll want to meet some of the great minds from our planet.
What, all the brainy people, like?
I come in peace. Will you speak with me? Yep, no, I understand.
You have come to our planet from another planet?
No, we come from our own planet. Not another one.
And will they be, sort of, intelligent, I suppose?
Well, this is the thing, you see. They'll have to be intelligent, won't they? I mean, we've come here in the first place.
Yeah. They've started playing with the chess set.
Oh, this is a development.
No, it isn't.
I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
It's going to change the fabric of society as we know it, in many subtle and mysterious ways.
Your time has come, you smug! The aliens are here! We're all going to die!
Drive on.
Flush this down the...
Excuse me?
And of course they'll be greeted with and treated with kid gloves.
Come on, show us your tentacles.
Somebody give me an okay on immediate surgery. Somebody find a doctor.
We got a sick man here!
They'll be like gods, won't they?
They will come down, as you say, Derek, like gods.
Are you looking forward to them coming then?
Terrified.
Be nice though when they come, meet new people.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Cecil Trachenburg.
Thank you, Mike. How you doing, man?
Also joining us in the booth is Mr. John Spira.
Hi, Mike.
We conclude Sci-Fi July with a look at Mike Hodges' Morons from Outer Space. Written by Griff Rhys Jones and Mel Smith, the film tells the tale of a quartet of less-than-bright intergalactic travelers who crash land on Earth. The film lampoons the ideas we have that Earth may be visited by beings from outer space, only to find that they're not as enlightened as we'd fancy them to be. We will be spoiling the film as much as we can, so if you don't want anything ruined, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen the film. We will still be here. So, Cecil, when was the first time you saw the film and what did you think?
I actually saw it by accident the first time. It was in the 90s. I was in the video store and I was remembering a movie. I could not think of the name of it. All I remembered was that it was about idiots in outer space. And I found this movie called Morons from Outer Space. I'm like, I think this is the one. And I was actually looking for Space Invaders. Which I later watched and enjoyed, but it is a completely different film. But I rented Morons from Outer Space, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, okay, this isn't the movie I was looking for, but this is actually really funny, because I grew up with Monty Python and Benny Hill, so I really got that, that sense of humor. So I watched this and I'm like, wow, I'm really happy that I stumbled on this movie. I don't know if I would have seen it otherwise. And it's really, I was not expecting a space musical satire. It's a lot of things crammed into this one movie.
And John, I know that this is probably in your book, but please tell the people at home, how did you first come across this movie?
I saw it on day of release. I was 10 years old, and my parents took me to see it in the cinema. I can only imagine that it was in the cinema for 1 week. I really can't imagine it lasted that long, because in this country, it does not have a high profile. It's not a big film here. It's not a film which people have heard of at all. It doesn't crop up in lists. It doesn't crop up on TV. It's not even available on DVD in this country, let alone Blu-ray. So this is not a film which is known here. And I can't believe it would have survived long in the cinema. But my parents were fans of Griff and Mel. And knowing that I was a fan of Star Wars and Close Encounters and everything sci-fi, I think they knew it was a safe bet. And I adored it. It immediately got a special place in my heart that night. I was talking to a friend about this one time, but when you're at a certain age, when you see your parents laugh at something, like really kind of laughing at something, which maybe is a little bit above what you understand, it gives it a greater validation than perhaps it deserves. So I think Morons it's had a special place in my heart since then, and it's not going anywhere.
I actually remember Siskel and Ebert talking about this film, and I don't remember much about the review, even if they liked it or not. I do just remember Mel sneezing inside of the helmet. And that was enough for me I must have been 12 years old. 14 years old when they reviewed it. And so at 14 years old, that was just freaking hilarious. And I was already a huge sci-fi nerd and was just like, yes, I have to see this. And I was also a little bit of an Anglophile, not as much as I would be in years after that. I would eventually be able to recognize Smith and Jones from, when the Bambi appearance on The Young Ones, those kind of things. And then I liked those guys and I would see them show up in things. I remember really wanting to see Alas, Smith and Jones, but not being able to find any way of seeing that over here in the States. I saw maybe a couple episodes of Not the 9 O'Clock News, but it was great when Smith started his whole, directing career, and he would show up in more things after that. But Jones, he just kind of disappeared for a while, and I always liked him quite a bit.
To kind of contextualize who Smith and Jones were at that time, there is a continuum in British comedy, still to a degree it exists, which is the oncoming generations of people who the BBC have backed kind of, consistently. And really, it started with Monty Python. And Not the 9 O'Clock News was kind of third generation. The second generation was the Goodies. I don't know if that really made it to the States. I know it's big in Australia. And then in the kind of early 80s, it was Not the 9 O'Clock News, which was a sketch show, which Smith and Jones were just a part of, which also featured Rowan Atkinson, who's, gone on to kind of great things, and Pamela Stephenson, who actually left comedy. Not the 9 O'Clock News was huge, but only within Britain and only for the time it was on. I don't know quite how to explain it other than to say it's not very well remembered here. It's not like all the others. When people talk about it, they do talk about it as having been brilliant, but it's not in heavy rotation at all. It's not repeated or anything. When they broke up, because Rowan Atkinson was clearly going to go on and be a big star, Mel and Griff really just kind of were forced together. Pamela Stephenson was leaving. Rowan Atkinson was going to be a big star. They'd already made millions by then just because they had a couple of hit singles and a hit album and a hit book, which had made them all millionaires, when they were in their 20s. And Mel and Griff just kind of naturally kind of formed a twosome because they used to do certain sketches together. And Morons from Outer Space was just offered to them because they were so hot at that point. They were allowed to make a film. It was just kind of like, well, what are you going to do next? We'll do a film, I guess. So that's where they were coming from. Like the commissioning of Morons from Outer Space would have had a theory behind it that, well, Monty Python finished on TV and moved into cinema. So let's give Mel and Griff a chance and see what they do.
It's kind of sad that Mel Smith is probably best known here in the States just for his tiny role in The Princess Bride as the albino.
Where am I?
The pit of despair. Don't even think.
Don't even think about trying to escape. The chains are far too thick. And don't dream of being rescued either. The only way in is secret. Only the Prince, the Count, and I know how to get in and out.
Then I'm here till I die?
Till they kill you, yeah.
And that's about it. And then Pamela Stevenson, I remember when she was on one of the worst seasons of Saturday Night Live. I mean, at least when I was watching Saturday Night Live, it was one of those really awful times. That was the 84-85 season. I remember her in Bloodbath at House of Death. But yeah, she's not really a known quantity. And then really Jones, I don't know if people would have something that they would associate with him. It's really just been Rowan Atkinson, who's now, he's still going strong. He just had that whole Man vs. Bee thing drop. And it's just like, wow, of all the people, I didn't expect really for him to be the shining star. I mean, he's a fantastic performer. I love Blackadder, but it's just like, wow, this guy has really parlayed this Bean type character into so much.
My point of view is it's just very lazy commissioning. The thing that Bean has done is it's filled a gap which existed at the time and still exists, which is that if you want to make a lot of money in comedy, a lot of people don't realize this, but you do silent comedy, because then internationally it sells all over the world because they don't have to dub it and it doesn't depend on the kind of cultural assets. That's why Mr. Bean was so huge, is because they could sell it all around the world because it was, it was the kind of silent comedy. And, he's made a good career out of doing that. It's debatable. I love Rowan Atkinson for Blackadder, and I love him for what he's capable of doing. And I kind of hate him for 30 years of, kind of ripping off Harpo Marx. And I find that very upsetting, the kind of blatant ripping off of kind of Monsieur Hulot's Holiday and that kind of thing, and Buster Keaton. What he does is regurgitate things that people who care about cinema are very, very familiar with. It upsets me. I find that really lazy. He's done very well out of it.
One of the reasons why, it is so successful, because it is the silent thing, but also because Rowan Atkinson, as the Bean character, is so good at his expressions. Like, I mean, even though, yes, he is ripping off the Marx Brothers and whatnot, he's doing it in a way that does elevate it. It's so much more funny because of the way that he's able to express the character, of how he's able to do things without saying a word. He'll just occasionally he'll say like one thing, and it's usually Bean, but he has that just look on his face and it makes it funny. And so while I kind of understand you're disliking it and, kind of being aggravated that, he has more or less borrowed and taken elsewhere, for me, I've always had a soft spot for it. I always find it funny.
He's essentially the last clown standing. We don't have that kind of medium of clowning in cinema or really TV anymore. That very physical, everything expressed silently. I suppose in a way he's kind of a treasure because he's the last guy holding up the entire oeuvre of that. So there probably should be a bit more respect for him.
Yeah, he's keeping it alive, He
really is. No, he really is. That is true.
And this is an unusual film for Mike Hodges, who we've talked about a lot on this show. We did an episode about Get Carter, about Flash Gordon, and now Morons from Outer Space. And I mean, I've talked about Croupier many times. I'd love to do an episode just solely on that. And, he's got sci-fi chops. He's got The Terminal Man. He's got Flash Gordon. He doesn't necessarily have the comedy chops, but I think that he pulls it off. And to read your book, John, as far as what was originally in the script versus what he brought to the table, I mean, there's some really funny lines in there. That whole thing when the aliens crash on Earth and they're smashing through all those cars, and we have the little line about they must be Belgian. That's one of my favorite lines in the film.
Totally. I mean, you've interviewed Mike before, haven't you?
Yeah, back for Get Carter.
I think when you meet Mike, you realize that he has a very, very dark, very dry sense of humor. And that's actually all the way through Carter. Carter is a dark, dark film. But for me, there are laugh out loud moments in it. So with Morons, yeah, it seems implausible that the director of kind of Get Carter would do that. But then does it seem so implausible that the director of Flash Gordon would kind of do that, you know? Mike is a really fascinating guy to talk to in general, but he is a journeyman filmmaker. And when you talk to him about his career, like as an overall, you could almost look at it based on the films he didn't get to make rather than the films that he did get to make. Because, I mean, I think that's true for a lot of filmmakers. They can be frustrated by their actual filmography because some of the projects they cared the most about were the projects which never finally made it to the screen. And Mike has very broad tastes. You know, he's not someone who you could just put in a box. And although he's famous for kind of Get Carter and The Croupier and I'll Sleep When I'm Dead and those kind of revenge films, I think the latter of those two were easier to commission on the back of Get Carter. And obviously he put his all into them. But there are some really wacky films that he tried to get made that didn't make it. So I think Morons, when he talks about what attracted him to the project, which is this notion of us looking ridiculously to the stars for higher intelligence, and then what would happen if they arrived and they were just like the worst of humanity, which is almost the most likely response because that's how we've ended up. You know, we're not going to get mystical star beings. We're going to get people in a caravan who have just invented the jump to light speed quicker than we have. And it'll be operated by people who don't even understand it, you know? So that's what attracted him to the project. And so it makes a lot of sense when you look at it that way.
We start with this amazing shot of what looks like almost like the Nostromo at the beginning of Alien, and then end with the laugh line, basically, or laugh moment of the visual gag of it's pulling a caravan on this huge chain, and there's Jimmy Nail coming out of this caravan and getting his air hose stuck in the door and then having to walk across this chain and getting all this garbage dumped on him and getting tripped up by gravity when he goes inside of the main ship. I mean, it's just, I love it. I love how this movie opens, and I love that it is constant jokes. Not all of them land, sure, but there are constant jokes, and they try everything with this movie, all kinds of humor. At one point, it turns into a musical, and it's like, okay, you know, why not? Why not do that with this? Because it's wild. And I love that you really never know which direction it's going in. It could have been a really easy, like, oh, we're just going to parody Star Wars or Close Encounters or some other sort of known quantity. But instead, it's a lot of things thrown into a blender, and we're just going to see what sticks to the wall once we pour out this gloop.
Yeah, it never goes where you would expect it to. You think with a title like Morons from Outer Space, you're thinking it's going to be, you know, fart humor or something. And really, it's like there's a lot of dumb jokes, but there's a lot of very smart jokes. And it's not really going in any direction that you would expect. You think like we were just saying, you know, it's going one way, and then it's like, okay, now it's a musical, and now it's this, and now, you know, it's satire and it's kind of scathing at certain points. They did a really good job of completely, I hate using the term, but subverting your expectations. You know, you keep thinking it's going to be this, and it ends up going, you know, that way. And the other thing that really struck me is the visuals in it, the models for the spaceships and the big sight gags, like the ship crash landing on Earth and driving down the road with all the cars and all that, is done very well. Like for essentially a comedy, it's got larger sci-fi and action level like quality of effects. Like they really went all out with some of these, and it's very impressive.
Even when they have what you could consider simple things like walking across that chain in no gravity, or Mel Smith when he's playing Spaceball, and that's all shot in I guess just slow motion, but it looks really good. It looks like it's a no gravity type of situation. And I'm sure they're not going up in the vomit comet and shooting 5 seconds at a time kind of thing like Apollo 13. This is probably done on a shoestring budget, but to your point, it looks really good.
You've got to remember that at this time, you had the whole Star Wars trilogy, you had the Alien films, you had, all of these sci-fi films were being filmed in England at these studios, and these technicians were working on whatever was coming up at the time. So, although Morons it wasn't actually a low budget, it was kind of a medium budget, really. But that kind of thing, you had the people around who could crack that out in an afternoon. Like when you compare it to like Star Wars and Alien, it doesn't look quite as good, but you clearly do have the level of technicians working on it who can just pull that stuff off. So yeah, it was amazing. It was just at that time, those were the kind of films that were being made in this country. So it was possible. And Mike obviously was just kind of probably 4 or 5 years off Flash Gordon. So he had directed a big film with a big budget. I know Griff told me that when they first appeared on set, it was not what they were expecting at all. They were expecting it to be a much smaller looking thing. But just Mike, as a filmmaker, had just gone in and, brought it up to the standards that he was working at. So they were surprised at the kind of production values themselves. And obviously also, the fact that it was not filmed in America. They had to recreate a lot of small town America kind of on the back lots of British studios and stuff. So the production values on it, I think, are fantastic.
3 of the aliens crash land on Earth at one point, and then the 4th alien, Bernard, who's played by Mel Smith, he crash lands in the United States. So we've got the separation of these characters. So it's really kind of odd because, he's all over, Mel Smith is all over the poster and all this kind of stuff. And he and Griff, they don't meet until the end scene. That this is a Smith and Jones film, but they are separated, and also Bernard is separated from the rest of the group the whole time. So it's like you've almost got this separate film going on at the same time as you've got the other one about the 3 aliens and their rise to fame. And then you've got poor Bernard over in the States, and he gets locked in a loony bin. He's trying to commune with garbage cans. There's just all this stuff going on where this guy's he's literally in a separate film, and it's just like, all right, eventually these two are going to cross, but it takes a long damn time for those two paths to finally cross.
Until the very end.
Yeah.
When I interviewed Griff about this, you've got to bear in mind that at the time that I was writing the book, both Griff and Mike hated this film, and neither of them had watched it since they'd finished it. And it was quite weird interviewing them. They were both very touchy about it. Things have changed significantly, thank God. I had 3 big questions for Griff, and this is all in the book. The book ends with a big interview with Griff. And the 3 big questions were, why were you and Mel not in the film together, considering you're a comedy double act? Because they meet in the last shot of the film. When I was a kid, I was like, oh, is that supposed to be now they're Smith and Jones?
It's the origin story.
Is that the joke? Is the joke that is the origin of Smith and Jones? And my other question was, why weren't you on the poster? It's a Smith and Jones film. Why is only Mel on the poster? And Griff's response was, I have no answer for any of that. And he just said, we'd never written a screenplay before. There's no reason. He's like, you're looking for answers. There are no answers. We'd never done this before. And the truth is, we just didn't fucking think about it. And that's it. That's all there is. So one of the joys of Morons from Outer Space, if you love it and if you enjoy it, is actually you're making a lot of mental connections yourself, which really they hadn't done at all.
Yeah, in all fairness, it should be Jimmy Nail's photo on that poster because he's really the star of the show.
He really is the star of the show. I mean, and also the fact that it says Morons, you think they'd put more than one of them on the poster.
Right.
It's really weird. But it's a great poster. It's a great image. Although, to be honest, I still don't understand how they could have used that image in the States and around the world because Mel Smith wasn't famous anywhere else. Like, the reason that poster works is because in the UK, seeing Mel Smith in a space helmet is very funny. So you'd say, oh, I want to go see that. That's ridiculous. The idea of Mel Smith in a sci-fi film. But they use that all around the world. So it's so strange.
There's that weird alternate poster where it's the person wearing like swim fins and a rubber duck around themselves. And it says they came, they saw, they did a little shopping. It's like, why? Why this?
That looks even worse.
It's so terrible.
I would never have seen it with that poster. I would never have seen it.
I don't even know what movie they're trying to sell with that. Like that's not this movie at all. Like that is a terrible. I mean, it is arguably kind of well done as far from an artistic standpoint. If it was the fart comedy movie, but it's totally not that. Yeah, they're with that cover, they're completely misselling the film. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's more like that Rocket Man movie. I can't remember. Harlan Williams.
Yeah, I think that was Rocket Man. Yeah, absolutely. That if that was the cover for Rocket Man, that would make perfect, because it's not that far off from Rocket Man. It's him in a spacesuit, and he's filled with I believe he like farted in his suit, so it made the suit big. So that was the movie that they were a couple of decades ahead of themselves with the poster.
Well, and then you see images from the film, and it almost is always Desmond, Sandra, and Julian all in their punk rock outfits. And that doesn't happen again until the very end of the film. It's like they've already gone through like becoming chat show celebrities. Then they start selling things. You know, you've got the lube beer that Des is selling. And then eventually they move. It's like, I mean, it's basically like that kind of weird ascension to stardom that you do here, where it's like, oh, well, first you're this type of person. Then you're like, you know, then you move into, I don't know, you're a singer. Then you become or you're a model, and then you become a singer, then you become an actor, and then you become whatever. You direct, and you just kind of like move up that chain if you're certain people. And that for them, it's like, we don't know what the hell we're doing. We're trying everything that we possibly can. We want to make money. I love how base that they are. And they're just like, as soon as they start to hear about money, it's like, oh yeah, let's sign us up for that, Griff. We want this so much.
In a way, it also kind of almost predicted that version of stardom. Because I kind of feel like in the 80s, you didn't have that many people who were just famous, not for any particular reason other than they've had a lot of exposure. And that's kind of what they do there. And it's so, when you look at it on paper, it is mad. I mean, it's moronic. The idea that they suddenly end up as like punk rockers singing, doing a gig, you know, doing like a stadium gig. It's so weird. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. But then that's the joy of Morons from Outer Space, is that it's willfully kind of, you know, stupid. It will always take the stupid choice. And you kind of have to respect that in the end.
The only real thread is that you get Sandra singing when she's being interviewed, and then you see her later on TV singing the same song. And I love that she doesn't know the words to the song, so she just kind of works that into, like, because basically she's stealing somebody else's song. It's like that guy from Yesterday, where he's just like, oh, I'm just going to take these songs from the Beatles and call them my own, and I'll become famous from this. And here she is taking a song from, what is it, Blob, her home planet, taking that and being like, oh yeah, this is mine. Here, I'll become famous off of this.
That's right. She claims to have been a rock star on Blob. I forgot about that. Yeah. When the truth is that I think in one interview she says, they say, so you have been to university? She says, yes. And they say, what did you study? And she says, shoes and colouring in.
Right.
One of the reasons why the movie really works is because you have the comedic timing and beauty of Griff and Mel. And they didn't entirely, I don't want to say they didn't know what they were doing, but following up on John's like interview with Griff, like where, you know, they got the opportunity to write a screenplay to make a movie, and they were like, okay, yeah, let's just see what works. And then you have it tempered by like the direction of Mike Hodges, who like he actually, you know, he knows what he's doing. So he was able to kind of take what they did and have it make sense, and then punch it up a little bit with a little more of his dry humor. And I think the whole thing, it really was kind of just this experiment that, because of the talent of everyone involved, it ended up working. Whereas if you had a different director, or maybe they would have wrote it and then had somebody else finish the screenplay, it maybe just wouldn't have all gelled, and it wouldn't have come together quite as great as it did.
What you're saying is exactly right. But your final point I have to disagree with, which is, as much as I love this film, and this is in my top 5 films of all time, and I've spent a year of my life writing a book about this. Okay, I love this film. It's not a good film. It doesn't work. It's a mess of a film. And most viewers who watch it will kind of watch it. I mean, and I've tried this because as part of the book, I sat down 2 film critics and said, right, you know, I want you to watch this and then I want to have a talk about it. And the agreement among my kind of social group, which I think is very similar to you guys, you talk about successful films as being the sum of their parts. And this film is the opposite of that. This is a film which doesn't work. This is a film which is a mess and which most people would not enjoy. But the parts are excellent. The sum is bad. The parts are excellent. So you have incredible performances, wonderful production design, a really unique sense of humor, and one of the world's great directors. But that doesn't mean the finished product holds together. What it means is you have an hour and a half of great ideas. And that's what's so wonderful about it. You know, the fact that it kind of doesn't work is what's so great about it. So I kind of disagree of the kind of narrative as kind of saying it's a script which maybe doesn't work from very talented writers. Then a great director comes in and makes it work. I don't think it actually works, but I think that everyone in it, everyone associated with it is so fucking great and so unique in their aspect that what you get is just something really interesting and always entertaining, and it will always wrong foot you. And as long as you're open to that as an experience, because I've watched it with people who will completely disregard it and just go, it doesn't make sense, it's stupid, it's crap. But if you're like us and you're open to things which are interesting, it's a very rewarding experience.
I can agree with that. I may have been overselling it a little bit, but the way that I usually work is regardless of if the movie is supposed to be a comedy, it's supposed to be sci-fi or whatever. If at the end of the movie, if I enjoyed it and I want to see it again, and if it really had something that has me thinking about it like days later and laughing at a joke or thinking about an action scene or something, I usually will consider that movie a success. Now, I don't necessarily will recommend something. Like there are a lot of movies that I adore that I've tried to recommend, like Surf Nazis Must Die. I love that movie, but I recommend it. People are like, this is the worst movie I've ever seen. With something like this, I would recommend it to people that I know, in my circle, my friends who like a lot of British comedy, a lot of that kind of stuff where they will get the jokes, they will get the bits, they will get some of the references. And at the end, they may not necessarily enjoy the movie, but I think they wouldn't hate it. They would kind of come from the perspective where you were, whereas, there were a lot of great moments in the film, but maybe the whole film wasn't that good. Because of the fact that it's so much all going on all at once and it all is packed into this one movie, for me, I really just think it works. It works in spite of itself.
I feel really weird saying it's not a great film because it's one of my favorite films. So it absolutely works for me. But yeah, I think we're basically on the same page.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I tell people watch Free Jack. It's a horrible movie, but I love it.
It's so much fun.
Yeah,
yes.
Right? It's a fun movie.
So much fun.
Can you defend it? No. But can you say I enjoyed this movie? Yes, you definitely can.
You can tell that Mick is having an absolute blast making it.
Every time he gets to say Furlong's name, he's just like, yeah, this is great.
Fasendak.
I just remember a big close of him going, don't do it. Don't do it. Oh, it was great.
This movie also gives James B. Seeking a lot of room to play in this. And I love him. Or sorry, Sicking is actually how you say his name. And man, oh man, I love him. I talked with him, about Outland years ago, which is funny because there's an Outland connection in here.
There is.
And, this was around the time that he was in Hill Street Blues, I believe. So he's just, in right after Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. So he's really at the top of his game at this point and gets to show up couple weeks ago, we talked about Oops Apocalypse, which Joanne Pierce was in as well. And we talked about the way that the Americans weren't necessarily lampooned enough in that film. This one, again, I think you could go farther with just how dumb Americans are, but especially having Sicking show up as this Colonel Larrabee and the music playing and him landing in this helicopter, the British are all like cautious about coming up to this ship, and he just lands right next to it, just like, all right, let's go. And he's just so like war happy and wants to kill everything. And I'm just like, yeah, this is a great parody of the Americans. I love it. And his Howard character from Hill Street Blues is all about guns and killing people. And I'm just like, yeah, good. You're just channeling that Howard and just having a great time. And I didn't remember that amazing reaction shot when he's dead and they cut to him and he it's so good.
Well, what's great about his casting as well is that they don't just lampoon the Americans. They put him up against Dinsdale Landon, I think his name is, who's the stereotype of the British guys, who's just very kind of effete and very kind of like a colonial in his approach. And I love that. I love that they just show the two sides of them. And when they have conversations together, nothing makes sense. They're just spewing non sequiturs at each other. It's just amazing.
Dinsdale Landon, he so reminds me of the guy who shows up at the end of Clockwork Orange, who's just like, oh, Alex, you're so much better now, and there's no reason to tell the media about all these things that happened to you. Like, he just has that same vibe going on.
It's that horrible kind of authority, kind of landed gentry, kind of bureaucracy kind of thing. It's interesting because we don't see those characters anymore. Those characters were very... from the kind of, from the year dot until about the kind of 1980s, that really kind of represented authority in this country. Government was like that until Margaret Thatcher kind of shook everything up. And now, now government is much more about kind of, personalities. But back then, it was very bland. If you were in the high power in the UK, you were almost kind of faceless. You were these kind of dull men in suits who were just too posh to even, they looked down on everyone and there was no emotion to it. So he's a brilliant kind of satire of that class.
Going back to James Sicking, because I had seen this in the 90s, I wasn't like entirely familiar with him back then. I'm watching the movie, and for me, it was like, I didn't watch Hill Street Blues until, probably the later 90s. But I'm watching it. I'm like, hey, it's the dad from Doogie Howser. and he's playing a hard ass. What is this?
He's so gung-ho about all of this. We were talking a little bit about the special effects, and I love the special effects of the creature that picks up Bernard, like kind of a AAA service. He looks amazing, and he's so scary looking, but I know it's just very effective. And if anything, he's probably just a puppet, but really good looking puppet.
Yeah. Very good looking puppet. Kind of like looked like a living skeleton zombie, and then are you the male or the female? So it's such a great puppet for just really a one-off gag.
Well, as well say it's a twofer because when that old guy picks him up when he lands on Earth, and he kind of looks like the puppet, and he's like, by the way, I'm a man.
This movie is just filled with so many gags, like those little kids that are like throwing stones in the pond, and then the swans turn around and the guys stand up and they're wearing swan hats. It's just like, that didn't need to be here, but it is so damn funny.
Which goes, piss off. That's right. Why I often think about it is, and I wouldn't change a frame of this film. I love this film. But if you can imagine, if instead of Mike, they had got a director, actually more like Mel went on to be, because Mel went on to direct the Bean films. But if you'd got a director who was more in tune with their sense of humor, I think you would have ended up with something more like the Airplane films, where it's constant gags and everything lands because you really have created a stupid world. You've created a kind of space where this works. I think it's so much meatier for being in the kind of real satirical, darker world that Mike creates. But there is a version in the multiverse of Morons from Outer Space which is a lot stupider, where it's just constant gags and more gags, you know. Yeah, I think it could have become that.
It would have been a more successful film if it was that, but it wouldn't be quite as unique as it is.
It wouldn't have the intelligence. What it's got is, behind all the stupidity, it has a very convincing thesis and a deep intelligence and cynicism to it. I mean, that's what Mike would tell you. It's a cynical film. And the way he directed it, he told me, was because at that point, as a filmmaker, he just hated Steven Spielberg. What he's doing visually is he's mocking Steven Spielberg at every step. And when you know that, you really see it. He's doing those dramatic push-ins and tilt-ups to people's faces and stuff. And for him, when he watched Spielberg films, he was so cynical about them, and he was so disgusted by like the sense of wonder and magic. That's what he was concentrating on. He didn't look at the script in that sense for the gags and the dialogue. His whole point was to really lampoon, especially kind of Close Encounters. And he did it beautifully.
Yeah, I was going to say, with the ending, with the basically the Close Encounter ship showing up, and it's pretty much just the Repo Man.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's just great.
Or Professor Trousseau, who shows up like Claude Lacombe, the Francois Truffaut character, and he's just like, doesn't speak any English whatsoever. And he's like, oh, he's going to communicate to them with music. And then that box opens up and it's that huge organ. He starts playing Scott Joplin's The Entertainer.
That's, for me, one of the greatest gags in the film. It was only when I was a bit older that I understood what it was, is that they talk up Trousseau as being this expert of communication. He's the guy who's going to break through, and then he doesn't speak English. And it's like, that's hilarious. That's brilliant.
And when the aliens finally arrive, you know, after they hear all the noise, you know, the last time it lasted 20 seconds. I love that cut to Des and Sandra having sex, and she's just eating an apple. but when the door falls off, and he's just like, you take that door off.
My friend Anton Bittel, who's one of the kind of sight and sound film critics, he said, like, when I made him watch the film for the book, he said that for all of the film's failings, he's a collector of dismal sex scenes. And he says, in cinema history, that is one of the most dismal sex scenes. She's literally lying eating an apple while Des is just doing his stuff on her. It's just
and doesn't terrible. she say like, well, get on with it, or something
exactly.
like that? Right.
When I was a kid, it didn't really dawn on me too much until later that, you know, not only do you have the whole parody of Close Encounters, but then the whole parody of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because they eventually lock Bernard in a psych ward. And I just love the whole thing of like, oh, I promised to teach the Eskimo chief how to play ping pong. And then you get to see all of these guys that are there. And I'm just like, oh yeah, this is 100% One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I love that stupid gag of the Eskimo chief pulling his fake arm off. And it's such an obvious fake arm that there's no way the nurse would have given him an injection and thought that it was real. But I just love that so much.
And also, where would he have gotten the fake arm? It's not even thought through in any way. It's just a stupid joke. For me, like, the great moment in that sequence is when Bernard breaks them all out. And there's this very dramatic moment. He goes, friends, thank you, farewell. And he runs off. And then they all just stand outside, just make loads of noise. It's just like, it's so stupid. But it's like, if that's not true, that's terrible. That's an awful representation of mental illness. That, you know, it's something you really couldn't do anymore. But I love the idea that he has broken out a bunch of people who can't function in the real world. So the second they're outside, all they do is just make noise until they're found again. So stupid.
I love that he goes to the police station and he's like, I'm here. I'm the alien. And they're like, get in line. And there's just all the people in costumes and everything. He's like, no, really, I am the alien. And they're like, yeah. And they're all like, no, I'm the alien. Yeah.
The whole bit with him eating the guy's spaghetti, for whatever reason, that just gets me every single time. Him completely unaware as Bernard's just there, just stuffing his face. I think Mel Smith does a great job. Speaking of physical comedy, just so much of his role is reactions and just him there stuffing his face with that spaghetti and not the guy not realizing until he takes the bread and starts soaking up the sauce.
Mel Smith is one of the great comic performers. He's a very strange character. He died a few years ago, kind of tragically, young, and he had an addiction to painkillers, and his health had got very bad. He's such an interesting character. Like, when you talk to Griff about him, their relationship was very much like Laurel and Hardy, in that, Oliver Hardy was off on the golf course and Stan Laurel spent months getting the scripts and getting everything perfect. And then Hardy would just work on set and get it in the first take and then go, oh, I forgot it. I'll go back to the golf course. And that was very much Griff and Mel's relationship as well, which Griff, in the interview I did with him, he says he found very frustrating, very hard to deal with. That Mel essentially was someone who didn't really do a service to his enormous talents. He did a lot of things in his life. He did theatre, he did comedy, he acted seriously in some really incredible roles, actually. I mean, when I was working on my recent TV series, I found him in a film called Babylon, which I didn't even expect him to pop up in, where he played a racist garage, mechanic owner as an employer. And he's this hugely talented figure who to some degree never really delivered on his talent. It was so easy for him. And you stick him in something in like Morons, and he lights up the screen whenever he's on it. You can't not look at him. He has the most bizarre and expressive face. It's just, I think he's incredible. I think, talk about kind of Rowan Atkinson, but Rowan Atkinson, when he does his facial things, he's mugging. He's doing extreme things with his face. Mel didn't have to do extreme things. Mel's face was so expressive that, the smallest, the scene where he sneezes in his helmet is a great gag, but it starts with him being depressed, slowly realizing he needs to sneeze, and then sneezing. And the progression of expressions in that sequence, if you watch it on pause, it's incredible. What he's doing is, when I did the book, I did a special edition on Kickstarter, and one of the extra things you got was I commissioned an artist to capture all of Mel's expressions. So you got a book which was just a picture drawings of Mel's face in every expression he did in the book, in the film. And because I'm that obsessed with him, he's such an expressive performer.
His face by itself, like his IMDb picture, where he's just kind of a little bit of a smirk, the guy just looks funny. I just love it.
Yeah, you see that, and you know exactly the kind of guy he is. You're like, oh, this guy. And then you immediately recognize him. Oh, he's been a character actor in all these great comedies. And yeah, he's just a naturally funny guy.
He was in a film called Slayground, which I do not remember well, but I remember him being very kind of dark in that. He crops up in Restless Natives as well. He's very good at being kind of really shady characters. Like I say, I just wish he'd done more. I look at his life and his career, and you go, it's very hard to kind of put a mark on it where you say, aha, this is the high point. This was his moment. I mean, in a way, I think Allegiance probably was like that. He got a lot of kudos for that. I just wish he'd done more. I wish he'd left a bigger body of work, but I get the feeling that he lived the life he wanted to and had an awful lot of fun because he was obscenely wealthy. Mel and Griff had their own production company in the early 80s and sold it for like tens of millions. They made out like bandits. Like I say, they were millionaires already coming out of Not Known News. But when they sold Talkback and they made all that money, it was absolutely kind of crazy. And, fair play to them. And I'm sure that's why, I think Griff has a huge work ethic. Griff may not be kind of famous anymore for performing, but he crops up on TV a lot. He's a presenter and he does a lot of interesting stuff. He's a bit of a national treasure over here. But I think Mel I think at a certain point just started to enjoy what he had in life, and he was a fan of the cigar.
Mel was in a movie that is not very well known. I'm sure you guys probably both know it, but it is one of my all-time absolute favorite comedies, Brain Donors, which if you want to talk about a movie that rips off the Marx Brothers, okay, it rips off the Marx Brothers, but it is unbelievably funny. I'm in a bad mood. I need to be cheered up. I will watch Brain Donors. It is just hysterically funny. And Mel is just great in it. John Turturro in, a comedic turn. Bob Nelson, who is the stand-up, just the three of them together, it is genuinely funny.
I remember that came out right around the same time as things like Nuns on the Run and The Pope Must Die, which we called The Pope Must Diet over here. And it was this weird influx of British comedy like that. What was that one with Lenny Henry too, where he
True Identity.
Thank you. Had to go undercover as a white guy. Yeah. And it was just all of these great British comedians all of a sudden were like there at the movie theater where I was working at. I was going through and seeing posters with these very familiar faces by that time. And I was just like, this is fantastic. But yeah, the combination of Turturro and Bob Nelson and Mel Smith was just like, what is this? What can this movie be?
I haven't seen this since it came out on VHS. I am now going to track it down and watch it again.
Well, it's got amazing, like Pat Proft was one of the writers and Dennis Dugan was the director of it. So I mostly know from his turns and things like Richie Brockman, Private Eye, those kind of things. He had an appearance in Columbo as well. But yeah, he was a director as well. I think he even did some I can't remember if he did any of the Adam Sandler films or if he just shows up in them.
I think he might have directed Big Daddy.
And he directed like Benchwarmers and Beverly Hills Ninja, Happy Gilmore, so yeah, he did direct some of the big ones. Kind
of going back to how base the aliens are is when Bernard finally travels to the UK and there's that reunification, they want nothing to do with him because they thought he was a jerk when they were in outer space, and they think he's even more of a jerk now because he wants to cut in on their profits. And him meeting them and them dressed basically like aliens, like punk rockers, and now they've got their song, and I love that fucking song, man. It's so good. I've got the 45 right here.
Hey.
So.
Nice.
I don't have the 12-inch remix though, unfortunately.
You don't want the 12-inch remix. It's too much.
45 is just the right length, huh?
They're morons, but they hate him. Like they have enough wherewithal to completely hate this guy who's just actually quite a nice guy.
I mean, he's stupid, yes, but he doesn't seem vicious. Like, they seem very venal a lot of times and just always lying and always trying to make up new stories. And just the way that Sandra fucks up and mentions Bernard, it's like, oops, I shouldn't have done that.
Let me tell you, there is, and it is terrible, but there is a novelization of this movie. When I spoke to Griff about it, Griff has never read this book. And basically, it was written by one of his school friends. So I think it was just like, at that time they were doing novelizations and they said, oh, you can do the novelization. So Griff doesn't even seem to know what was in this book at all. This guy just completely filled it. Like, cause there's novelizations, some of them were based on early drafts and some of them were just kind of bored writers who just like, this film is shit, so I'm going to fill in the details myself. And he fills in the details. The backstory is that the reason that they were going on holiday at all is because Jimmy Nail's character, Des, was drinking too much lube. So they had to get him off the planet and away from lube. So this was like a rehab trip for Jimmy Nail's character, but none of them could drive. So they end up getting Bernard, who is Dez's brother's friend, to drive. He was the only person they knew who was available who could drive. So that's the reason those four were in the caravan together.
All right, let's go ahead and we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with an interview with Graham himself, Griff Rhys Jones, right after these brief messages.
My name is T2756. Would you like to have sex with me now for money?
Worst Movies Ever Played is back with 3 new VHS movies for your ears.
Sextipede, you're alive again. How I've missed you.
Anything can happen in this actual play RPG podcast, and we mean anything.
You didn't think you could go to Texas Instruments without murdering someone, did you?
Subscribe to Worst Movies Ever Played wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you mind telling me how you got involved in show business and specifically comedy?
I went to Cambridge. Now, there was a club in Cambridge, which is a bit like that. I think it's the Hasty Pudding or the Harvard Lampoon or whatever, and that was there in the university. When I arrived, the first day I arrived, I'd been a pretty unsuccessful actor at school. I'd been in things, but never been given big parts. But I loved acting. When I arrived, there was a message from somebody who'd been at my school and had gone on to university ahead of me, called Douglas Adams. And Douglas Adams wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But he hadn't written Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at that stage. But he was a year above me at school. I'd known him through being in Julius Caesar and various Shakespeare plays, things like that. So he sent me a note and said, do you want a part in a play being directed by a man who became a completely notable historian, and Sue Lim, who's a playwright now. And so the Rivals playing Frank. And I said, wow, this is fantastic. I mean, literally, I hadn't even checked into my room in my dorm. I was just completely just arriving at university. And suddenly somebody says, do you want to be in a play? And it was in the university theatre, and which I didn't realize at the time was quite a prestigious sort of thing. And most people didn't do that until they'd been at university for a little bit of time. So I said, fine. Went along, auditioned, got the part, and suddenly I'm acting with all these slightly older people, feeling very pleased with myself, very impressed with these stylish university types and all that stuff. And so I went then to see my tutor, who looked after my was there. It was his job to say, what are you going to do? And I said, I'd quite like to do a little bit of theatre. And he said, oh, now be careful. It can be very addictive. People can get really involved in this. I would recommend that you wait, a year and then try and, go to ADC. And I said, oh, no, I'm already in something. You can imagine his face fell. He just thought, oh, no, we've lost this one already. He hasn't been here for more than 30 minutes and already he's lost. And I was lost. So I just spent a lot of time when I was at university being in everything and directing loads of things and being in charge of things and being in charge of But he said, at the end of my first year, I got invited to be in a review, the annual review, to go and audition for it because I'd done a show it was in the middle of a great big student. It was in the middle of student discontent. And we've been doing this show. We moved it into the occupied areas, the lecture halls. And we did it there. And it was a huge, suddenly we went from playing to about 10 people a night. We played this thing to 1,000 people. It was very addictive. And I was invited as a result of doing that to audition for this annual review. And I was in it the first year. Now, this was just something that happened to me. It was rare. It happened because I was already up to here. I was almost up to my nose in this stuff already. And suddenly I'm in this. So for 4 years, I was involved in the Footlights. And the first one I did was with John Lloyd. And John Lloyd, I don't know if you're aware of this, Blackadder and all those great shows, Not the 9 O'Clock News, Blackadder, QI, and directing Rowan Atkinson, all this stuff. John left. He was in his senior year. He left, and when he left, I'd followed him. We all went to work in BBC Radio, including Douglas Adams, because it has the last of the comedy sort of departments left in the world, I think, to make spoken comedy. Before podcasts and things like that. And so off we went, and we all worked there together. And one thing led to another, and we did a big series called Not the 9 O'Clock News, which moved to television. So we all became like child stars. I was 26 when that happened. And suddenly it was like being in a band. It was really huge. And, we were the front page of every newspaper in the country, mainly because we had a very, very beautiful girl called Pamela Stevenson, who went on to marry Billy Connolly, who you may know. So one way or another, it was all quite close. It was all quite connected. Then, as is the way with a lot of these things, it split asunder after about 4 years. You couldn't, because that's just when you get young people together, the band splits fairly quickly unless you happen to be the Rolling Stones and you're sensible. So we were more like the Monkees, as Douglas said. We were in this created comedy show. It was difficult to remember that because it was a topical show, and we only did, 4 seasons of it, but it was just a massive hit. And really, since it was about the same time as Saturday Night Live was setting up, it would have been much better if they just recast and continued for another 50 years. But the way the BBC works, it didn't work like that. So we were all let loose. And I then worked with, being my mate, Mel Smith, and the two of us fitted together and we became a sort of double act, which lasted a long time.
What was that relationship like as far as the two of you together, and especially when it came to coming up with ideas? How did you bounce things back and forth?
But the great things about Northern Ireland News was, and what made a big difference to the program was, it was really difficult to find a job as a comedy writer in the BBC. I mean, in those days, there were 2 channels. There was ITV, but, you could arrive and you could claim great things for yourself, but it was difficult to work your way in. When Not the 9 O'Clock News started, it said to everybody, send us your stuff. It was a freelance show. So it basically was able to say to everybody, send us your stuff. And so Mel and I went on to make another freelance show. And most of what we did was read other people's material and go, okay, we'll do that. This suits us. We like this stuff. And I only say that because it's really important to understand that I ended up writing about 60% of the show. I wrote the worst stuff and I wrote the best stuff, I like to think. But, it's sort of quite to do what amounted to about 30 hours of sketch comedy is a big, big deal. I mean, when we finally finished and the BBC said, we're going to retire you sort of thing, I went, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Because you can imagine sort of waking up every morning from the age of 18 to the age of 42, which is what I was older, 47, I think, sitting there and going, have I got another sketch? Have I got another idea? And Mel and I wrote some stuff together, but generally I did most of the writing. I'd put my stuff together and then we'd have a meeting where we'd sit with a producer, some of the writers, and we'd sit around and we'd read through this stuff that I'd written. And you can imagine it's a weird thing to be the one who's writing. Mel gave up writing stuff quite quickly, but presenting it to your partner, a bit like Laurel and Hardy, you'd present it and say, what do you think? And he'd be loyal, he'd laugh, but they'd all choose the stuff I thought was the worst. It was sort of inevitable. I'd go, oh, I see you like this slightly crude, easy stuff. What about the more complicated sketch I've written, which has taken me, the best part of a week to write? And they go, no, we don't like that. It was a weird experience. And that was my life. We did it, every summer I'd retire and sit down and hack away, I genuinely think sometimes you'd be sitting there and you'd come up with great ideas, and other times you'd think, I'm looking really closely, but that looks like the bottom of the barrel to me that I'm looking at there. But it was an experience because Mel was a really solid professional person to work with. And we were really different types of people in some respects. He loved gambling. When he had money, he bought the leg of a racehorse and things like that. And I remember once we went away to write a film, and Morons from Outer Space. And he insisted in the middle of writing this to go off to Grosseto to watch the horse racing initially. So we had to go watch Italian horse racing where he didn't understand a word of what it said in the papers about these horses, but he was betting on the form there. He was addicted to get to horse racing and stuff like that. And he drank a lot and he was a party man, and I was the complete opposite. But when we sat and did stuff together, we laughed at the same things. So, I mean, you've got to blame both of us if ever you go, that wasn't a very funny sketch, because there were times when we did things. I remember one night in the middle of a thing, we did a sketch about a piece of wood where I went into an antique shop and I looked around all the antiques, and I came to the man behind the counter and I said, I'm just looking for a bit of wood. And he said, a bit of wood? And I said, yeah, I'll pay a lot if it's the not right piece of wood. And he went, oh, okay, just a minute. I might have something. And you heard him go off. He went off screen. And then you just heard a huge rending and sawing, pulling and grunting, And he came back with a piece of wood and presented to me. And I said, wow, that's a fantastic piece of wood. I love it. And he said, wait a minute. I think you're going to be excited by this because it's part of a pear. And he pulled up another pear. And I just remember Mel and I found this really funny, this sketch. We found it so funny. We did it to absolute silence. The audience didn't understand what it was about at all. Anyway, there were times like that. There were other times when we had great time, and we worked with a lot of people. So then we set up a production company called Talkback in England, an independent production. Television suddenly opened its doors to independent production. And so we established a sort of English TV company. We were originally a radio company, and then we moved into TV. And we made television with Alan Partridge, with Steve Coogan, with Ali G, with Ricky Gervais. All those people came and basically worked for us for a bit, which was great. So we gave a lot of people, a new generation of people, Andy Iannucci. We gave them a lot of people a sort of a platform where effectively, because this is the way we'd always worked, was to say, we need somebody between us and the bosses. So what we offered was a sort of refuge in the middle of Soho. So people didn't have to go work in for the BBC and meet a lot of people with silvery hair and grey shoes. They could come and work with us, and we didn't really interfere. The policy was, if you're good, we like you. We wouldn't hire you unless we thought you were good, and you get on with the thing. And a guy called Peter Fincham, who went on to create Downton Abbey and various things. He was our first managing director. It was all great. Off we went. So we had a sort of dual career.
I think one of the first things I ever saw you in was the Young Ones episode, Bambi.
Well, here's the way that the world works out, right? The Cambridge lot, the varsity people, had set up not long ago. And then there was another group of people who were younger than us who were coming through. Stephen Fry and Emma Thompson and Hugh Laurie. They were much better than us. They were really clever people. And then in Manchester, in another university, there was another group of guys who, Rick Mail and Ben Elton, and they set up a thing. But they were slightly younger than us. So we were, this is crazy, isn't it? We're talking about 3 years, 3 years younger than us. We're not talking about sort of, like we were old and we were all young. So what had happened with that is they started the Young Ones. And one of the directors, I remember, came to us and said, he was working with us. He said, I've just seen this amazing program. We've been working on this amazing program called The Young Ones. And we all went, we shall see, maybe. And then, of course, it became a mammoth hit. And to be honest, it was really generous of them to come to us and say, would you like to be in it? Come and play a part in it. Which was, a fantastic opportunity. We were happy to do. One of them, I'm not going to mention, said when it was suggested, he said, but I thought we hated those guys. So anyway, I turned up and I just saw it the other day because I was playing Bamber Gascoigne, who was the host of this University Challenge quiz show. And University Challenge is still going. It's been going and it's 50 years old. So they had a sort of ceremony. They had a big program to celebrate it. And I was called in because of my impersonation. And I had to say, I can't remember anything about it. It was all so long ago. It was 40 years ago. I can't remember what happened. But I watched it, and it was amazing to see such a fantastic bunch of people all gathered together for one episode of this show, which was a funny show.
So you talked a little bit about the writing of Morons from Outer Space, and I'm so curious how that project even came to be, because this was your first feature script that you're doing.
EMI, the producers, British film producers, out of rank, which was a relatively august production house, had a new head, a new lead in charge. So we had been asked, because of the success of Monty Python, 10 years before, we'd been asked if we could make a film of Not the 9 O'Clock News, which was a very different sort of show because it was more like Animal House. I mean, it was topical and it was, or Saturday Night Live. How would you make a film out of Saturday Night Live? But at the stage, we were already in the beginnings of the Great Split. So I could tell, I mean, Rowan already, Rowan Atkinson already had a bit of a sort of, a vision for what would happen to Rowan Atkinson. And funnily enough, it didn't include me and Mel. I forgive him, who wouldn't? He's become a great star and really brilliant. But, so we thought, we're setting up a production company. We're doing a lot of things together, me and Mel. And so I said, well, I've got this idea for a film. Let's try and make an outline of it and see if anybody salutes it. And the simple idea was, what if the people who arrived from outer space were as stupid as everybody on Earth? Because it was assumed that the people who are going to arrive from outer space are going to be either monstrous who kill everything or deeply intelligent, bringing all this space. What if they were just people on holiday who crashed on Earth? I liked very much the sort of storyline, and I'd worked out quite a complicated storyline. And that was the thing that interested me. And then we started to add gags to it, one kind to another. I'm fascinated because we made the film. It was big budget stuff. We got big money from EMI to make it. We went off. We had that fantastic crash on the motorway, which was brilliantly staged, with the spaceship arriving out of space. We had a lot of big gags in it. We had Jimmy Nail, who's a big name in it at the time. Interestingly, we decided selflessly and rather stupidly in retrospect to separate the two characters of me and Mel. And I felt, and this is a weird thing, if you're the writer of a film, you do need to overcome all modesty and push yourself forward. Because if you're the writer, you think, I'm going to hide. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to be responsible for this. And I'd written most of the film. So I felt very much, although Mel and I had been away to write it, we went away to film, but we had a script. And I felt very much I must be careful about taking the part, So I took a sort of secondary part in some respects. Anyway, we then went and made it, and it got released, and it got the worst reviews that any film has ever had in history. The critics absolutely loathed it. They thought it was an insult to them. We had poor Mike Hodges, who's a great director. He directed Flash Gordon. He directed The Croupier later. He directed Get Caught. I mean, he was really famous and a really, really lovely man. I mean, a brilliant and clever man to work with. So, in other words, he wasn't used to making what we might call low comedy. He was most used to making slightly higher sort of endeavoured films. And I don't think we had readied ourselves for the shitstorm that we knocked up. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. So we made it. It went out, and we ran a mile from it. I mean, we just went into hiding. You sort of go into purdah. You go and lock the door and hope. I was in a play. I remember when it came out, and I had to go on stage every night. And I used to think, as I was going on stage, I'm thinking, what if there are people who've seen the film? And one critic wrote, the Time Out critic, I think, wrote, "Die before you see this film." I mean, it's amazing. So I hadn't seen it for years and years and years. And then Mike and I got phone calls only about a year ago, 2 years ago, from the British Film Institute, which is really august. It's the top of the tree. And they bring it up from somebody saying, I need to talk to you. We're going to have a showing of Morons from Outer Space. We went, oh, no, please don't do that. And they said, no, I've written a book about it. And this guy had written a book about our film. And we went, what, a film about great disasters, And he said, no, it's a film. The film was ahead of its time, and it was full of this stuff. So Mike and I went to a showing. The first showing I think either of us have been to, because Mike is always going, he was telling me, he always goes to film festivals across the world because he's such a distinguished director. And whenever somebody says, they get finally in the film festival, somebody turns to him and says, "So, Mike, do you want to tell us a little bit about Morons from Outer Space?" Mike goes, no, let's move on. And neither of us had ever quite sat down and watched it. Certainly not with an audience of fans, enthusiasts for it. And I have to admit, there are sticky patches in it. There are things I would redo. And I suppose today we'd make that film, we'd put it out in front of, preview audiences a bit more. But I also thought, well, there's some really straightforward, funny moments in this film. And it's quite a profound film. It's got, I know it's sort of about morons, but it's quite a profound statement to make in a funny sort of way. So there we are. All I can say is that Mel's been dead for about 8 years now. And he, unfortunately, he died when he was far too young. But I just wish he was around because I want to ring him up. I want to ring him up in heaven or wherever he's ended up and say, Mel, it's Griff. You're never going to believe this. So it's not such a bad watch, Morals Man. It's not such a bad watch. It's got some great gags in it. There's a wonderful moment. You watch these as a writer and you forget about them. The whole business about the guy playing Truffaut, who plays the organ, is very funny. And the stuff about, Mel starting off and sneezing into his space helmet, and suddenly the whole of the front of the space helmet is funny. And the business about there's a riot going on outside where all the people are rioting because the aliens have landed, and they want to speak to the aliens, want to get the words of wisdom from the aliens. And while we're watching it inside the house where we're hiding, one of the, Joanne says, she said, "Oh, look, somebody's throwing a brick." And I lean into the television to have a look. The brick comes through the window. I mean, in a funny way, I think the essence is there where we're sort of, in those days, between two stools, because it was the time of airplane as well. And I think maybe we could have focused on getting more and more and more, sight gags in, more and more big. And there's a wonderful sequence where I've stolen somebody's uniform and I'm walking around trying to get close to the aliens. And I pass people, but I've got somebody else's name on my uniform. So I put my hand up to cover the name. And soon that becomes a salute. And everybody around the place is going around saluting each other, which had just started from the thing. And I like the other stuff, which I always thought was great, where we're trying to escape, and there's a man sort of standing guard on the exit, and I hit him over the head with a metal bar, and he just gets up and goes, "Ow, Christ, ow! What on earth did you do that?" And follows me down. Corridor. And the point is that we were full of references to other films, all the way through. There are references to other sci-fi films and escape films, things like that. And, I just think the critics didn't like it. I think they thought it was presumptuous or something of us to take the piss out of the E.T. and all that stuff. So, anyway, it was an amazing film to make. And I just ran away and never made another film. I never even tried to write one. I just thought, oh no, this is just too humiliating. And which is a pity. I think I should have written more films. We did have a guy. This was the first time we realised that was something weird about Morons from Outer Space. Was we got an approach. My agent rang me up and said, "There's a man who wants to make a film with you." And I said, "Right, who's that then?" And they said, "Well, he's a New York real estate agent who has a friend who works in a video shop. And they've decided that Morons from Outer Space is the funniest film, and they watch it all the time. And they want to make Morons 2. In fact, it had done so well at the box office for EMI that EMI wanted to make Morons 2. But the complication was, when I look back, we'd been in a show, not the 9 o'clock news, which had been the sort of toast of not just of the general public, but of the literati. Do you know what I mean? It had been recognised, it had been saluted by the critics. Not when it first started. When it first started, somebody said, "Who are these wankers?" But, that's comedy. That's comedy. And really, we should have been strong because people say in any new comedy, somebody appears, they either hail them or say, who are these wankers? And in this particular film, they said, who are these wankers? So, it was a bit of a shock after having been the toast of the town to be called morons and not capable of making a film. Unfortunately, I then got embroiled in making my own sketch show, and I didn't get back to thinking about film for a while.
You and Mel were in a film, though, together, Wilt. How was that experience?
Well, that was weird as well, because I'd worked with the producers in a television adaptation of the same, Tom Sharp had written a series of very successful Baroque novels, slightly over the top novels. I'd been in that. It was good for television with the producers Carnival. And so they started talking about making a film of Wilt. And obviously, as a performer, you go, oh, great, thank you very much. And I was very honored that they'd come to me to do this. Really fantastic. So we go on for a little bit. And then they say, at a meeting, they say, and you'll never guess who's going to play the policeman. So I thought, I wonder who it'll be. Will it be Rick Mail or maybe it'll be Stephen Fry and they said, Mel. And the funny thing about being in any double act, as anybody who's in a double act, is you're never appreciated just for yourself. People always want to see the pair of you. They always go, oi, where's your mate? When you walk down there. So I wasn't overjoyed by the knowledge that they got Mel in to play the other part, because then it became what I saw as a vehicle for the two of us. But it was a decent film, a record of it, but it wasn't a huge success. It was all right. Again, the difficulty is in life, you learn that comedy is a complicated business, because when people don't really go 100% for you, and film is particularly true like this, you find yourself pretty bruised by the reactions to it. But we did it, and it was great. Yeah.
How did you get into the travel business?
Well, I took retirement. What happened to me was I'd done the sketch show. I had a production company. And without being too sort of sorry for myself in this, but I mean, that was a major part of the production company. You're making these every year. There's a lot of budget. There's a lot of, and that's how you keep it. You have to work. You have to do it. And so, for 15 years, I made this series, and I was basically the writer of it. And I found it, as I told you, a slightly exhausting process of being there, because I don't think it did me personally as a human being a lot of good. Have you seen the Laurel and Hardy film with Steve Moon? It's great. But I watched that on the plane. I'm afraid there were tears rolling down my cheeks. So I was thinking, my God, this is just like what it was like working with Mel. Do you know what I mean? Sort of like Mel wanted me to go out there and talk to the producers, and he was happy if I did. And he didn't care. Do you know what I mean? So you become it's like a marriage. One of you starts to be the one who goes and deals with certain things. So we finished it. We sat down, and I sat down with a load of writers I really loved, who I'd worked with. And we wrote a sitcom called 3 Floors Up. It was just two men, and the idea, which we'd started to work on in our show, was really about a fairly broad comedy, but really basically about two men in a room. Two men in a room, and we wrote a pilot, which was about plumbing's gone off. Mel wants to watch a football match. He's invited people round. We get a plumber in, and we're sitting there freezing to death in our own office, trying to carry on working. But we were cartoonists, and he was the one who did the drawings. It took him 20 seconds to do the Mr. Men drawings, and I was the one who used to write the column. So it would take me all day to write the words of the situation. And we did it deliberately, as we often did, as a sort of ironical comment on how we lived. Anyway, we had it all sorted out what we're going to do next. We made the sitcom, and I remember our boss, producer, said, the head of our company, Peter, said, well, if they're looking, what's the problem? It's funny. It's hilarious. And this is great, you guys. I mean, we've got a winner here. But they turned it down. And we realized that, or I realized gradually, that there was nothing I could do. They said, I think it needs a woman in it, and I think one of you needs to be a woman. And I said, that's ludicrous. We're two blokes. We can't write one of the parts to be a woman. We can obviously introduce a woman. There's no problem there, but you can't. Well, could you write it with a woman? no, I write this myself. I'm not a woman. It's just crazy. Anyway, we realized that as time was going on, they were just looking for ways of saying, we don't want to work with you. So you go, okay, if you're heading for the madhouse, you fight that. Do you know what I mean? You try to do everything you can. But if you're like me, you go, oh, okay, I see the way it's going. Because things like we remade it, rewrote the whole script, sent it in, and then the letter back said, I think the time has passed for this. And you go, my God, we've gone away to do 3 months' work on this script to bring it into line with what you're saying. And as soon as we've done that, you just say, I think the time has passed, Okay, I think the time has passed. I went to see Jo, my wife. I said, darling, I'm buying a boat. We're going to sail around the world. Don't fuss. It's all right. It's all over. And that's what we're going to do. But we'll have a fantastic time. The last thing I want to do is stay in London and constantly pick up the phone saying, anything for me, that sort of life. We've got plenty of life. We've got a big company, which we're now selling. And, let's just accept what's happened and not fight it. I bought a boat, a slightly smaller boat than the one we were going to sail around the world in. But she didn't want to come because the kids. So I said, it's all right, don't worry, we'll go. So we sailed off to sail to Russia, to St. Petersburg from Kent in London, going up. And the only reason we wanted to go there was because we could get there without losing sight of land. So me and a mate bought the boat, and a long time since I'd had a boat, I knew how to sail. We sort of got as far as Denmark, and the phone rang, and my agent said, oh, they want you to do something else. They want you to do a program about old buildings that need saving. So I said, oh, all right, I'll come back and do that then. I'm just going to go to St. Petersburg, but I'll be back at the end of the summer. So I sailed on, and I always believe that that's like fate. You just got to accept the way the thing is going and not worry about it. And if I hadn't done that, I'd have probably been busy trying to be in somebody else's comedy program, but I was asked to go and do this program. That led to another thing, and then suddenly I wrote my book about sailing to the Baltic, and then I get picked up and I'm doing programs on mountains and rivers in Britain and things like that. And so I'm just wandering the world, pointing at things and saying how beautiful and moving around. And to be honest, I have to say that to get out of the studio environment for a while, to just go, okay, it's not a bad thing to not be waking up every morning, beating your head and going, I haven't got any funny ideas, or where are we going to find some funny writers to help us here? It was a good thing, and I loved working that way. You work quick, you work with a team, and I always like working in teams. And you work with a cameraman and everything. I've just been to Canada, so I've done a big series in Canada, which will be pitching up on television. But I've been, and then I was picked up by an Australian company about 4 years ago. So I've made ones on New Zealand and Australian railways, things like that. However, I still do a lot of comedy because I started another production company which made travel and things. And then I did that for about 10 years. And then I moved out of that, retired from that. And that was partly because I decided that's all right. I've had a break. I've had a break, a 10-year break. You may think that's quite a long time, but it's time for me to get out there and do comedy again. So I do a show, and I've done 3 separate tours of the show, and it's a sort of one-man show. And I'd come from sketch comedy, but I love being in that. So I love it. I tell stories, and I tell funny stories. So one way or another, this is great. It's a really great, entertaining way of, and also after so many years, starting in 1980, just before 1980, and getting to after 40 years, 35 years before I went on tour, to be able to go and just say what I like without somebody saying, I tell you what, we love what you're doing, Griff, but can you introduce, that's a bit too strong, or we need this, or you ought to be doing more of that. It's just fantastic. The programs I was making had, 9 executive producers working on them, all of which thought their job was dependent on them having an input. And there's a point where you go, okay, how great. I walk on stage in front of an audience in Cardiff or wherever, in London, walk on stage. That's me. That's the audience. And nobody can tell me what I have to say. And if I want to start the whole show by telling other stories, things I've never told before, I'll do it. That's great. It's wonderful.
Have you ever thought about pairing up with Michael Palin and doing like a trip show together? Maybe comedians in trains getting tea or something?
I guess that's an idea that will be passed in front of us soon. You should take out a copyright on that one, because that inevitably what happens is you start doing these things and they ring me up. They say, Griff, this is a whole thing in the Mediterranean. And I said, yeah. And they said, we've been talking to the channel and they think, I hope you don't mind this. And you go, well, try me out. They think you need to present it with somebody else. I said, right, okay. And I said, there's no problem for me. I mean, I like it. I like working with other people and I like to do new things. So why don't we lead it on? They said, but there's a bit of a problem. I said, right, but what's the problem? And they said, well, it would have to be a diverse casting. Right, okay, that's good. I'm moving with the times. I have no fix. I've got lots and lots of diverse friends. I said, I'll put a list together of people who might want to do it. So I sent them the name of a black lesbian comedian that I had worked with. I said, what about her? And they said, oh, it doesn't have to be as diverse as that. But in the end, we didn't make it. We didn't get it together, the program, but it was great. I mean, for a while, I thought that's great. Well, let's go in that direction. But, in a funny way, there comes a point where, especially when you've been knocking around as long as I have, where you don't necessarily want to do rubbish, but you also notice that, you need to keep a presence out there. Otherwise, people don't come see the show. So I do think it's partly because I go, let's do that. It was great. So the ones on Australia and New Zealand were big hits and went onto Netflix, and I was really happy to see them there. It was fantastic, and I do absolutely love making those shows. I mean, we move like the clappers. We don't have. I mean, when I first started, I made a thing called Slow Train Across Africa, which was a really great series. But for ITV, the wrong sort of thing. They didn't do it the right thing with it. Doesn't matter. It still exists, and I'm sitting, for example, I'm sitting in a restaurant in Oslo because I've done a journey, just me and my wife, just for fun, for a newspaper, from Bergen across the Hardanger Plateau by train. It's a great train journey, one of the great train journeys in the world. And it goes up into the frozen wastes of the mountains and then comes down to Oslo. I'm sitting, when we've been in Oslo, we go for a meal and a bloke sitting on a table 3 tables away suddenly got up and went, oh. And I said, right. And he came over to the table and said, oh, hey, slow train through Africa. One of the great things about doing travel shows is you suddenly confront people who've seen the program in the most unlikely circumstances. I was in a market in Tunisia, in Algiers, in fact. So I'm talking about a place which is actually right off the beaten track, Algiers. And we were going to make couscous, and I've been taken by somebody to go and buy the ingredients to make this in the market in Algeria. And Algeria, as a country, is the biggest country in Africa now, but it has fewer than 200,000 visitors from outside every year because it's had a terrible history of civil war and everything. But I'm in the market and I'm trying to buy some tomatoes, and the man who's serving me the tomatoes suddenly goes, "My God, it's you!" This was while making Slow Train for Africa. So what he watched, I can't remember. But it was absolutely fantastic, So television is very disparate these days. When we used to make Northern Icon News, it used to be watched by 18 million people every night, And now, there's so much television everywhere that the big hitters are slightly different, But because they often hit emotionally for strong people. But I sit there and I watch Game of Thrones and I go, I'd ring up my agent and say, everybody's in Game of Thrones. But, all my friends are in it. What's wrong with me?
At least Harry Potter, if nothing else.
Really? I could turn up and do a bit of that. But it's all, you either get it or you don't get it, and then it comes up. But still, I'm making a film with Phil Trail about skiing guys, so I'm back making a film after Christmas. I'm really pleased.
Mr. Jones, thank you so much for your time. This was so great talking with you.
It was very good to talk to you. I hardly let you get a word in edgeways, but I'm sorry. It's like I'm on stage again.
All right, we are back, and we're talking about Morons from Outer Space. So, John, you've made mention a few times of your book, and I really want to hear more about that, how you came to write about that, and have you done any of these other Forgotten Cinema books since then?
No. It's so basically, I'd written my first book, which was called Videosyncratic, which was about kind of my life in video shops. Had really enjoyed doing that, and I was kind of between film projects. And I wanted to start writing again quickly. The only idea I had was to write a book about Morons from Outer Space, which is this, it's a really bad idea of like dedicating a year of your life or more to a book which is not going to get published and which no one is going to buy. And actually, the foreword of the book is written by Frank Turner, kind of a rock star. He's touring America right now, actually. He's one of my old friends. And he's now kind of like a big rock star, and he goes and plays arenas and stuff. And he's the only person, until I met you guys, who in an idle conversation, we found out that we both loved Morons from Outer Space. Because he said to me, "What are you doing? What are you working on?" I said, "I'm going to write a book about a film called Morons from Outer Space." He was like, "That's my favorite film." And I was like, "Shut up." And he was like, "It's my favorite film." Told me the whole story about how he got into it. So I was like, well, fuck it, I'm doing it then. Okay, I'm emboldened, I'm going to do this. But I kind of wimped out slightly by making it a part work. So the idea is it's called the Forgotten Film Club. And I've written all these rules about which films qualify for the Forgotten Film Club. And the books are pretty thin volumes, and they're more like a collection of essays around the film, So it's not kind of a straight narrative. So it's kind of a collection of essays and interviews around the film. Yeah, I threw myself into it. I wrote it kind of very quickly because I had a huge passion for it. And really, I was looking at kind of part of the book is about the film and part of the book is about my relationship with the film, because that's kind of almost what interests me about it. And we went off on some really bizarre tangents. And, at one point I went into the BBFC, which is the censor in this country, and kind of asked for their files on Morons from Outer Space. And one of the things that was fascinating is one of the reasons it got a higher rating, it's like a 15 or whatever when it came out, is because in one shot, a naked extra just runs into the background and screams something and gets taken away. And in the notes, they said you could see a flaccid penis flapping about. So we can't let children kind of see this film. So one whole chapter of the book is me finding out whose penis it is. Because I'm just like, well, who is this guy? All of a sudden I'm like, well, there's some relevance to this. So, one whole chapter goes on an adventure to find out who is the guy with the penis. And it turns out his name is Fred Woods. It turns out that people I know knew him and were friends with him. And I get the whole story of of who this guy is. And then that disappears. There's a point at which, because I obsessively kind of collect things, I'm trying to find if there's any props or anything left from Morons from Outer Space. And there's basically kind of nothing. But then in doing that, I discover the story, which you alluded to earlier, of the helmets. And it turns out that all of the space helmets in this film, they got cheap off the rack because they were left over from Outland. Which they were made for the Sean Connery from Outland. But then it turns out they made so many of these helmets that for the next 20 years, whenever a British film or TV show or advert had a spaceman in it, they used these exact same helmets, and you could see it through all of these different kind of shows. And so, yeah, it was a kind of mad journey. And there's been part of the fun of the book is opened up. I did it as a Kickstarter, and it was quite successful. And I've sold quite a bunch of copies. You can get it on Kindle now on Amazon. But one of the great kind of fallouts of writing this book is that because I got in touch with Stephen Lane at propstore.com, who I knew anyway. I'd made a film about him when I was at the BFI. So he's a nice guy. But I'd got in touch with specifically to talk about Morons from Outer Space, and he had said to me, nothing has really ever come up from this film. Like, nothing. And I'd even said to Griff, I was hoping that, like, I was like, have you got anything? Like, where's the spaceship? Like, that must have been a great model. Where is that? And he's like, I've got nothing. Like, all he had was the original storyboards. It clearly stuck in Stephen Lane's head. And then, I don't know, a year or two later, I get this email from Stephen Lane, and he's like, John, you're not going to believe this. I've got Mel's spacesuit here. Yeah. And I was just like, I have to own that. And he goes, I know. You can have it cheap. He's like, he goes, no one else is going to buy this. And he did me an amazing deal. So I now own Mel Smith's spacesuit from Morons. My wife won't let me keep it in the house at this point. Because it stinks. Like, it hadn't been cleaned. And at some point I'm going to get it professionally cleaned. I think a lot of it was from the land. I think it was one of the ones that he wore when he first landed on Earth. So it's got that kind of red mud kind of all over it and stuff. But I can't track down a helmet. I have been desperately trying to find a helmet to kind of finish it off. And that is now the mission of my life. So if any of your listeners either know where to get an actual or a replica helmet of the Outland helmets, I've even written to the guy who made them originally, and he has no interest in making any more. And I know he's got the original molds, but he's not doing that at all. So that is now my main mission in life, is to find a helmet to finish that off and finally kind of get that on display. It was a very validating experience to write that book and to finally get all of my kind of love for this film on the page and in a kind of coherent form has been great. And it's led to things like this. It's actually, in fact, the weirdest fallout from this whole thing is that when the Kickstarter campaign went really well, and I'm friendly with the guys who run the Prince Charles Cinema in London, which is, right in the centre of town, really great indie cinema. And we talked about whether we could do a screening of Morons from Outer Space. And I begged Mike. I was like, you've got to come. Like, I want to do a screening. I want you to come. I want Griff to come. They hadn't spoken to each other since the film had been made. And when I got in touch with Griff and set up the interview, he phoned Mike and they went for lunch together and they had a lovely time. This is like, if my career is worth anything, this is what I have achieved, is that I have brought kind of like a certain amount of kind of comfort to both Mike and Griff, because for both of them, this film represented something very negative. And for Griff, when he had lunch with Mike, it made him really happy. And he was when we did the interview, he hadn't rewatched it, but he said, I'm ready to rewatch it now. And after we did the interview, he said, I'm ready to rewatch it now. Because he got excited to talk about it. He remembered what he'd loved about coming up with the idea and what he'd wanted to do. So after we did the interview, he went and rewatched it. Mike didn't rewatch it, but Mike agreed. Mike loved the book. So what had happened is I'd interviewed Mike for the BFI and I'd used that in the book, but I'd been too scared to phone Mike up and do another interview because I really got the feeling that when we did the BFI interview, he shut me down. That he spoke about Morons to a certain point, and then it was clear he did not want to talk about it anymore. So I changed the subject. So I put it in the book, and then bizarrely one day through my website, his name cropped up, and he'd ordered like 15 copies of the book. I should have sent him a copy, but I was too scared. But he had found out about it through Griff. So he ordered 15 copies. So I cancelled the order and I sent him like a box of 30 copies. I was like, I'm so sorry. I should have sent you these anyway. And when he read the book, he loved the book so much that he was like, okay, I'm ready to watch this film. So I said to both of them, right, let's do this. Let's just do a screening and let's do a Q&A and let's have fun with this. And it sold out. We sold the screen out. It's the first time the Morons have been shown in the cinema in this country since its release. We sold it out in central London, and I did a Q&A with Mike and Griff on stage afterwards. And when Mike was coming to the stage, he just said to me as he was sitting down, that was wonderful, John. And he, seeing it in a room full of people laughing all the right points for both of those guys, when they came out of that screening, they were walking on air. They were both so happy. And like I said, if my career has achieved anything, it is those guys finally understand now what they did. They don't look at that film as a failure. And the fact that, that Griff is willing to do an interview with you about it as well, he'll talk about it now, and Mike will talk about it now. And that makes me so happy. The BFI just did a retrospective of Mike's whole career, and they showed Morons from Outer Space. And I think had we not done all this, I can't imagine that would have got a screening. He wouldn't have allowed it to, So yeah, that's probably my biggest achievement in my time on this planet is probably offering a balm to the creators of Morons from Outer Space.
Well, it's like me and Black Shampoo, trying to get the word out, luckily, well, I mean, some of the people associated with it, like when I was talking with Tanya Boyd, when I brought that up, she was just like, okay, interview over, thanks, bye. And it was like, fuck, but managed to talk to John Daniels, and then Graydon and I, still stay in contact, but it was just amazing to be like experiencing part of the film that you love so much as a child, or as a young person, and being able to have this better connection with it. And so I just applaud you for being able to bring this film out to more people, and then being able to bring those two gentlemen together and being to be like, yeah, this isn't the worst thing in the world. People love it.
When I made my first feature film, and I got very upset about some response to it initially, a very good friend of mine kind of took me aside. He's actually a musician. And he said to me, once you put this stuff out into the world, it's not your business anymore. It's for other people. It's not for you anymore. You have to let it take on a life of its own. You can't guide it. You can't get upset about it. You can't kind of comment on it. And I think that's actually one of the lovely things about anything creative that I remember Terry Gilliam saying that making films is like being alone in a boat on a lake at night and firing a flare gun into the sky. When you see other flare guns go off, you're not alone. It's kind of like it's really nice to kind of have the validation of kind of other people's responses to things. But I think that even works for things that you're not happy about. And I think as a creative person, you can beat yourself up about something not being what you wanted it to be. But the truth is that doesn't matter, because it's going to take on an importance to other people, which is really special in their lives. And I think that's true of film in a big way. I think film is very emotional. People's responses to things are, it's not just about the film. It's about the time you saw it and who you saw it with. And that can make something really, really special. And that can be very confusing to the creators, who obviously don't have that connection to it at all. But if you can take a step back and look at what your work has become for other people, it can be a very special thing.
Another thing, too, and I'm not comparing the quality of these two films, but it also factors into perspective. The movie I'm talking about is John Carpenter's The Thing. When that movie came out, it was after E.T., and critics and audiences hated the movie. Like, absolutely hated the movie. The director of The Thing from Another World, he came out and lambasted The Thing. Like, he said it was, he said it was terrible. I believe his quote was, if you want meat, go to the butcher shop. He just thought it was endless gore. And now here we are decades later, and it's considered one of the best sci-fi movies ever. It is beloved. And so a lot of times going to Morons from Outer Space on the complete other end of the spectrum it's not as quality as something like The Thing, but it's a movie that I think more people have appreciated over the years. And I'm genuinely surprised that it hasn't been picked up yet by one of these boutique Blu-ray companies, Vinegar Syndrome, Severin. It seems like the perfect movie for them to pick up.
I tried to do it myself. I went out searching for the rights, because I was like, if no one else is going to do this, I put out a DVD once, which no one's heard of, called Jerk Beast. And that tanked the label that I tried to create.
Oh, no.
So that was good. That bankrupted me immediately. But so I kind of had a bit of experience. Like, I said, you know what? For Morons, I would do this. I was like, I'm friends with Mike and Griff. I could make an amazing Blu-ray. We could do it on Kickstarter. I've got a big following on Kickstarter. I know that it wouldn't lose money. And I went to the rights holders. And it was just a nightmare, the amount of money they wanted. And that was for an SD master.
Oof.
And I was just like, it's never been mastered in HD, let alone kind of 4K or anything. And you're absolutely right. I just got the Severin Return of Captain Invincible 3-disc set, you know? And that's another film which I adored as a kid, and I'm so happy to see. Like, there has to be someone has to pick up this fucking film. It's a Mike Hodges film. It's the missing Mike Hodges film. Put this fucking film out.
Yeah, it kills me with how many, like, some of the movies that get picked up. I mean, I'm happy that a lot of movies get picked up where I'm like, what? But then there's something like this where it's like, why isn't this? Like, what's, you know, and it's got to be something, either they can't find the negatives, or it's just that they don't think there's demand for it, or what. I don't know. But I mean, I can't imagine that there's not somebody out there. I mean, like you said, you did the screening for it.
Yeah,
and
we sold out.
Sold out. It's baffling to me. I'm always surprised with that. But then I guess I shouldn't be entirely shocked, because I was talking with Shadow Stevens about his movie Tracks.
Oh God, another great one.
Another great one, exactly. The original movie that it was supposed to be was quite different. So he was trying to track down the rights so that he could re-edit it and release both versions, release, you know, his cut and release the theatrical cut. And he found out that HBO currently owns the rights, and he tried to buy the rights from them. It wasn't a matter of money. They just refused to sell it because they're like, you know what? We own this and we just don't want to do anything with it. He's like, well, sell it to me. I want to do something with it. And they're like, nah, we'd rather just bury it. And so he's depressed because he's like, I want to show, you know, how my version was. And he's like, it's not even a money issue. He's like, they just will not deal. And so that could be the thing. Maybe whoever does own the rights just doesn't want to deal.
Morons was made by Thorn EMI, you know, which is a long gone bust label. So the rights do kind of bounce around. I'd be interested to know who owns the US rights, because I think it's MGM, which is I don't know what they're like about licensing to boutique labels.
Oh, MGM licenses to everybody.
Well, in that case, anyone who's listening from Vinegar Syndrome or from Severin should get those rights, and we'll all help you and do an amazing Blu-ray. Actually, the one thing we've not touched on, or we've touched on lightly, which I think needs to be emphasized, is how great Jimmy Nail is.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And Jimmy Nail is a fascinating character to me. You can get his autobiography, which is a really interesting read. But this is a guy who has lived a ridiculous life. I think he made stained glass windows. He was like, or windows in general, something to do with glazing. That's what he did. And he was a heavy drinker, and he was a fighter on the streets of Newcastle. And eventually he got put in prison. And when he came out of prison, he met a girl who fell in love with him, who was from kind of like a middle-class family. He was staunchly working class. And she got him kind of more on the up and up. And one day there was an advert in the paper for Newcastle-born actors to appear in a TV series. And she said, you should audition for this. And he was like, I'm not an actor. And she said, I don't care. They're describing you. You should go and audition for this part. And then he got the lead role in a huge TV series called Auf Wiedersehen, Pat, over here, which was all about Newcastle builders going and working in Germany. It's got the best theme song of any TV show. Definitely try and listen to the theme song. And all of a sudden he has this career. All of a sudden he's an actor. And he is a weirdly fickle actor. He's made enough money privately. He says in his autobiography that he made his money on real estate very early on. So he doesn't have to act. So he doesn't crop up that often, but when he does, it's always really interesting. And the other film that he made, which is I put alongside Morons as one of those films that I'll put on when I need cheering up. You know, if I'm feeling ill, this goes on. Is the movie Still Crazy? Have you seen Still Crazy?
Doesn't sound familiar.
Oh my God, you would love it. So it's about, it's a British film, comedy, about a band who split up in the 1970s. And then in the 1990s, absolutely, they reform in the 90s. It's got Bill Nighy as the lead singer. Jimmy Nail is the bass player. Who else is in the film? Timothy Spall is the drummer, and Stephen Ray is the keyboard player. And it's about their disastrous reunion European tour. And it's so funny, and it's got so much pathos, and the music is really good. Like Spinal Tap, like it's Spinal Tap are kind of purposefully kind of, the songs are satirical. Like the songs in Still Crazy actually aren't satirical, but they're really good. And it's got an amazing cameo by Bruce Robinson, and the film has got so much fucking heart. And, that's why I love Jimmy Nail. He is just, pathos is the word that always comes to mind. I love seeing him on screen. He's just electric.
Let's go ahead and take another break, and we're going to play a preview for next week's show.
夜がひしめいて息を凝らしているわ。犯罪が近づいたのよ。
いや、実は犯人は娘よりも私の秘蔵のダイヤ、エジプトの星を狙ってると思うのだが。エジプトの星？
私の紋章。この優しい二の腕の黒トカゲよ。
黒トカゲという珍しい種族です。でも今はお嬢さんのことだけを考えましょう。その顔も普通でないものが感じられるんですよ。
人形室を調べて。私まだあなたみたいな探偵に会ったことがありません。こんなに心底から犯罪を愛し、犯罪にロマンチックな憧れを寄せている探偵に。
僕が興味を持つのは第三の女のような純粋で優しい犯罪者に対してだけなんです。
法律が私の恋文になる。
牢屋が私の贈り物になる。そして最後に勝つのはこっちだ。
That's right, we're kicking off another grab bag month of films with a look at Kinji Fukasaku's Black Lizard, which I don't think has a proper Blu-ray release. I'll have to check that out before then. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Cecil and John. So, Cecil, what's been happening with you, sir?
I am working on tons and tons and tons of videos. I have got a big one coming out for Judge Dredd, the Stallone one, with a history and a half. I'm working on Cat's Eye with the Lewis Teague Stephen King adaptation, or not adaptation, but there was two stories from Night Shift and one original story that was written for the screen. Lots of stuff. I'm doing my first con in August. Going to be at this Sci-Fi Fest in Vernon, New York, with Peter the Cinemaskist and Brandon Tenold. We're all going to riff a movie live, and it'll be interesting. I've never done one before, so I don't know what to expect. So lots and lots of stuff going on.
And John, I know you are super busy these days. Can you tell the poor folks at home what you've been up to lately?
I'm actually finally not busy. The last 2 weeks I've had off for the first time in many, many years, but I've just finished my first ever TV series, which is a 4-part modern history of British cinema called Reel, R-E-E-L, Britannia. That's out in the UK now. It's going to come out in the US on BritBox in about a month's time. And that is basically a breakneck tour from 1959 to the 2010s, covering pretty much the entire story of modern British cinema. We have lots of fun with it. We hit all of the expected notes, but we also go off-piste a lot and look at the weirder films and the crazier films. And it's huge interviews. We've got interviews with Terry Gilliam, Ken Loach, Mike Lee, Sally Potter, Gorinda Chadha, Edgar Wright, Terence Davis. For some reason, all the big hitters came out and we got all of them. So it's the very apex of my career. It's been an incredible journey making it. And yeah, it's incredible that it's now out in the world and getting nice reviews.
Did you do a whole episode on Morons from Outer Space, or did you kind of save that for another time?
To prove how grown up I am and how even-handed I am, Morons from Outer Space is not mentioned in it once.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That must have hurt.
No, I had very strict rules as to what was featured in the film. And the whole point of the film is the whole point of the series, is it's kind of about how British society affected British film and how British film affected British society. So really the rules for film being featured are that either they're reflecting something important that was going on at the time, or, they have the film itself change cinema or change society. And sadly, Morons did not fall into either of those camps. But we've pretty much included there's about 500-600 films that we mention in the 4 hours. It's a real breakneck tour through everything. There's a lot of weirder and crazier films than Morons in there. So I'll leave you with, I don't know if you heard of the film Venom?
The one with Tom Hardy.
No. Jesus, no. No, this is one with Sterling Hayden, Oliver Reed, and Klaus Kinski. And
wow.
It's a house in London which is under siege. So Klaus Kinski is the bad guy. He takes siege and lays siege to this house and tries to kidnap the son, but they all get caught in the house because there's police outside, played by Nicole Williamson, by the way. And if that's not bad enough, you've got Klaus Kinski and Oliver Reed holding your house up. For some reason, a black mamba snake gets loose in the house.
Wow.
That's the film. And it is one of the greats. It's one of the great missing British films. It's amazing. The DVD of it is worth watching purely. The commentary is amazing because Klaus Kinski and Oliver Reed hated each other through the production of the film. Literally, Oliver Reed would tip Klaus Kinski's trailer over with him in it, on a daily basis. So it's the maddest, craziest film. And that's one of the many obscurities that we sideline into. So yeah, it's fun.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, please check out some of the other shows that I work on, such as The Shabby Detective, Dreams for Sale, The Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller, or Rankin' on Bass. They are all available where finer podcasts can be found. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Expression on our face. There goes that crazy bunch, they're really out to lunch. That bunch of jerks from outer space. We're morons. Welcome to our pleasure dome. Welcome to our mobile home up in the sky. We're morons. People say we've gone too far, but we don't know where we are and we don't know why. Silverbird has landed on your motorway. No one could have guessed what was inside. Hey look, they're drinking tea. Hey look, it's on TV. Turn on and see two worlds collide. We're morons. Welcome to our pleasure dome. Welcome to our mobile home up in the sky. We're morons. People say we've gone too far, but we don't know where we are and we don't know why. We don't know. Someone out there's watching me and I don't know who, trying to predict what I will do. What have we got to lose? I think I'll buy some shoes, maybe a home computer too. Travel incognito on the underground, form ourselves into a tidy queue. We'll charge enormous fees to mention frozen peas. We'll paint our faces green and we're a slot machine. We'll take a peaceful nap if we've got say we've got